Alright, I'm just gonna say it. Bakugo might be dead. And in this video, we're going to be discussing whether or not this may actually be the case, as well as talking about things revolving around Bakugo. So this is going to be a very Bakugo-centered video, and hopefully you're going to be prepared for it. But first, right after this. Hey guys, how's it going? It is your boy, Monkman Drew, and I'm here to do my discussion for My Hero Academia Manga Chapter 362. And in this video, we're just going to be talking about what happened to Bakugo in the most recent chapter, because if you don't know, Bakugo might actually be dead in this chapter, and that's one of three things that I really want to discuss in this video. 1, if Bakugo actually is dead. 2, to talk a little bit more about whether or not what we saw is Bakugo's Quirk awakening, and 3, something that I didn't really bring up in the review, but what is the connection that Bakugo has with One For All and the second user that we saw in this chapter? Those are going to be the 3 main points that we are going to be discussing in this video, but before we get into one of these points, let's go over the differences between the official and unofficial translations. And pretty much when it comes to this chapter and its translations, pretty much everything is like a 1-for-1 with how things were translated from the official to the unofficial and the unofficial to the official, where the only slight differences between the official and unofficial translations just comes from Tamaki's plasma cannon move. In the unofficial translations, it's cornucopia, but in the official translations, it's chimera, I believe. Correction, it's actually vast hybrid. But yeah, that's pretty much the main difference between the official and unofficial translations. So let's dive into the discussion about Bakugo. And the first thing I want to go over is something that I really didn't go over in the review, and it's Bakugo's connection with the second user, as well as Bakugo's connection with One For All. Because here's the thing. When it comes to Bakugo in this chapter, and we'll talk a little bit more about this on whether or not Bakugo is dead, we get to see that Bakugo is in this blank void space, and that he gets to see an image or a vestige of One For All in the shape of All Might. And here's the thing, only a few characters would definitively know what this vestige of All Might would look like, and that's mainly those individuals who have been inside the vestige world of One For All. So if anything, what this kind of confirms is that what happened during the second movie, I believe it was Heroes Rising, where, spoilers for the movie, Bakugo obtained One For All for a short amount of time, but unfortunately One For All eventually went back to Deku. But in that movie, Bakugo was technically a user of One For All, and we've seen that even if you have a small part of it inside of you, you still have the ability to connect with One For All, the Quirk, in this vestige world, because it's implied that All Might in the vestige world, when he was hanging on to the flames of One For All, was able to manifest in this world even though he didn't have the Quirk anymore. So it's very likely that this panel may pseudo-confirm what happened in that movie to be somewhat canon to the story of My Hero Academia. Which means that potentially this could mean that Bakugo accidentally gave part of his Quirk to Deku and that Deku may be able to use it later on, but I doubt that's going to be the case. But what this does do is allow for Bakugo to have some form of closure, because Bakugo, very much like Deku and many other students, has a fascination and an awe and a love for All Might, and that when Bakugo was a little kid, he really wanted to be like All Might as well, which is why we've seen both Bakugo and Deku have an All Might card. And being able to meet All Might in this One For All form will give Bakugo a little bit more closure, with him having a connection with All Might, and that showing that he truly did want to be like All Might, that he truly was a fan of All Might, to the point where the only regret that he really has is that he was unable to get a signature of All Might, which ironically enough is something that Deku actually has. So the idea that I'm coming with is that this is more concrete understanding of what is going on with the story and how other outside forces are canonized in the manga, if not necessarily how they are in those respected mediums, but that they do exist somewhat in this form in the manga. Or, you know, this is just a figment of Bakugo's imagination, but it's so realistic and so accurate to what is inside One For All that I doubt that is actually the case. But with that in mind, we can also begin to draw a connection that Bakugo might have with the second user of One For All. Because in this fight, Bakugo put the fear inside of Shigaraki, something that no one has been able to do except a user of One for All or Endeavor. And that the idea is that the person speaking right now is actually All for One, but I'm more convinced that this is more of an amalgamation of All for One and Tomura at this moment. But either way, both of them would understand that One for All is the only power that could really instill fear and damage inside of him, and that Bakugo may be reminding them of the second user. Now, this could mean a few things. One, it could mean that Bakugo is very similar to the second user, and that he is making them being very reminiscent of the second user in a more symbolic sense. It could be that Bakugo actually has a direct connection with the second user, being an actual relative, which is something that I brought up in my review. And the third possibility, and I really hate this idea, is that they are connected because they are the same person. And that the second user is actually Bakugo, who went back in time to be a part of One for All. Now, I highly doubt that Bakugo actually went back in time because potentially he is dead in the present, but I think that most likely than not, he either has a relationship with the second user by being a relative, or that it's more symbolic, that he is doing something that Shigaraki didn't think was possible unless he had the power of One for All. And that this will tie into the idea that Bakugo is actually being able to catch up to Deku, who has One for All, by also putting the fear inside of Shigaraki that only One for All could have done. So that's something to think about and ponder about, and I really enjoy this idea that it's actually more symbolic than it actually is a physical connection of him being a relative of the second user. So yeah, that's something that I really want to go a little bit more in depth into. And the second thing I really want to talk about is just the more confirmation of what is going on in this chapter being related to Bakugo having a quirk awakening. Because I brought up in the review that this may have been the first time we've actually been explained about how Bakugo's quirk actually works, and that is not necessarily the case. We did learn about what Bakugo's quirk was in chapter 9 during the first exam test arc between Bakugo and Ida versus Uraraka and Deku, where in that chapter we get a similar explanation to what is going on in this chapter, that Bakugo's explosion can come out the palm of his hands, and that it occurs by having the sweat that is made of nitroglycerin explode in that specific part of his hand. But that when it comes to this chapter, they're probably establishing that the quirk awakening is that he no longer needs to have the palms of his hands be the source of the explosion. Because throughout the story, every time we've seen him sweat and explode stuff, it has always been through the palm of his hands. But in this chapter and the last chapter, we see the explosions are actually just coming from his sweat that is coming from the different parts of his body. And even now, we see that the explosions are coming from different parts of his body, such as his face and such as everywhere across his body, which gives him increased speed to be able to match and outpace Shigaraki in this fight with his destructive power. And with that, this may be a confirmation that this is Quirk Awakening, because it added a similar power set that he didn't have, but is still related to it. Very similar to how Toga was able to transform into people, and a connection with that is that she's able to use the quirks of the people that she loves. And with Geddon, who had the ability to manipulate the ice that he had, but his Quirk Awakening is actually lowering the temperature of the ice in the water to make more ice. And how this relates to Bakugo is that he was only able to create explosions from the sweat in the palm of his hands, but now he's able to make explosions from all over his body. So you could definitively say that this is most likely than not a Quirk Awakening because of the power boost that he gained from it. But from here, this actually ties potentially into the third point of whether or not Bakugo is dead, because there's a side effect of his cluster upgrade which could have led to him actually dying in this chapter. Because it's explained in this chapter that cluster allows him to accumulate the beads of sweat in the palm of his hands. But that when it comes to the fact that if he stores too much, that the beads in the palm of his hands have to find other ways to try and release and escape his body. Which is why we see the explosions coming from different areas that aren't just the palm of his hands. But the issue with that is that if it only is supposed to come from the palm of his hands, that's probably where most of the resistances to the explosions and the sweat would come from. And that it may not necessarily come from the other areas of his body. Which is why in this chapter, it's explained that he is feeling pain throughout his entire body, and that he's trying to fight through it, and that this is something that Deku has been doing the entire time. So this shows that he is getting a little bit closer to what Deku has been able to do throughout the story. But the fact of the matter is that because the sweat is still explosive, it has to try and find a way to leave the body. And we see in this chapter that potentially one of two things happened that could have led to Bakugo's death. Either A, the sweat accumulated too much into his body that it accidentally caused his heart to rupture, or B, Shigaraki hit him dead in the chest and opened up a hole in his heart and his chest. Because it's very unclear on whether or not what happened was something related to the Quirk or related to Shigaraki, but all we really know is that Bakugo definitely has a hole in his chest. And, if you don't have your heart pumping blood throughout your body, yeah, you're going to die. But then we also have to remember that this is a fictional story in a fictional medium catered more towards young teens than it is more adults, meaning that it's very unlikely that characters will face very gruesome and horrible deaths in a story more catered towards a younger audience. However, that does not mean that it is an impossibility, because we have seen with Horikoshi the ability for him to actually kill off characters that many people love and enjoy, such as Midnight, such as Night Eye, such as Twice. He hasn't been afraid to kill characters, and if people tell you otherwise, that is not very accurate. Especially with how this chapter is building up to the idea that Bakugo is dead. And I think that it would be a spit in the face if it is revealed that Bakugo isn't dead in this moment, or if there is a way to revive him, which is something that the story has never established to be a concrete idea or a concrete concept that can occur for anyone and everyone. It's not like with Dragon Ball where they have the literal Dragon Balls that can revive everyone, or in like other series where there are other ways to revive other people. My Hero Academia is relatively grounded in reality, and people that take significant damage to their body cannot and do not recover quickly. And if the damage is severe enough, it will lead to their death. That's what happened with Night Eye. That's what happened with Midnight. Twice, most likely than not, got stabbed through the heart or the chest that caused his death almost instantaneously. And I think that what is happening with Bakugo is that he is dying, and that this is going to be a very quick and very sudden death. And the reasoning why Bakugo might be dying in this moment is to really show the stakes of this war, and to show that no one is truly safe, and that anyone could die, and that this is going to amp up the stakes of this war significantly. But that is only the case if Horikoshi is willing to stick to Bakugo dying, and if he is going to bring him back in another way or another, make it so that it kind of makes sense for what we have in the story. But I think with the damage that he sustained and what we've seen in the story, that is very, very unlikely to happen, and there has to be some form of miracle that could actually bring Bakugo back to life. So yeah, these are pretty much all of the thoughts that I really wanted to discuss in a video talking about Bakugo, and me personally, I think that it is a very high likelihood that he is dead, but because of the medium that we are in, it may not stick, and I will actually be a little bit disappointed if that is not the case, that Bakugo is actually dead. But yeah, that's all I really wanted to say on this topic for right now. Let me ask you, do you think that Bakugo is actually dead, or do you think that Horikoshi is going to find a way to revive him and bring him back to life? Leave your thoughts down in the comments down below. I would love to read them. And if you like this type of content, leave a like on the video to show me that you want to see more content like this. And don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel for more content like this. Do all that cool jazz, and hopefully I'll be able to catch you in my next video. Goodbye!